Teaching Linux at my local community college forced me to confront something a little embarrassing. I hadn't logged into an Ubuntu server since I was a sysadmin. My students were asking me questions I just couldn't answer. So, to start getting myself reacquainted, I tracked down Nathan, a 21-year veteran of the Ubuntu community. He's been living this ecosystem longer than some of our listeners have been using computers. This episode is all about our conversation. Hey there, and welcome to the IT Guy Show, episode 21. We're talking about Ubuntu today, what's new, and what's changed in the Ubuntu space and in Canonical. And so I could think of nothing better than to reach out to some friends in the network, and they got me introduced to a gentleman who I actually got to meet at scale. We're going to do this episode in the fall, and decided that it's just the timing wasn't quite right, and so it ended up that we pushed to the spring release, which of course is the LTS release during even numbered years. So I actually got to meet Nathan, who is my guest today, at scale in person. We got to chatting, and I think pushing this off just is going to make it that much better. But before I introduce my guest, some quick background. I've been in enterprise Linux since 2011. Most of my time in Linux has been spent on Fedora or RHEL or CentOS and some of the downstream clones as well since then. But last year, I actually got the chance to start teaching as a professor at a local community college, and so the course that I'm teaching is a Linux systems administrator course. I know, big shock. But the funny thing was, and what was the kind of the inspiration for this episode was, I spent all that time in enterprise Linux on Red Hat based distributions, and the course has labs and examples that are based both in CentOS and in Ubuntu. And so it was kind of embarrassing in a funny way to reach out to my students or to have my students reach out to me and ask me a question about apt or about Snap or something, and go, you know what? I don't remember the last time I logged into an Ubuntu server. It was probably in the late 2010s when I was still a systems administrator. So this is a chance for myself to learn a little bit about Ubuntu, kind of feel the waters in the ecosystem, and I can think of no one better than someone who lives it every single day. And with that said, let me introduce Nathan, who is my guest for this episode. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. I know this has been long in the making, but thank you for joining me.
It's my honor, really. I'd say I do not work for Ubuntu Canonical. I never have. I'm a volunteer. And Aaron couldn't make it. But I have people at Ubuntu Sprints I've been to a couple times at Ubuntu Summit, and people are like, why can't I find you on Mattermost? And I'm like, I don't work for Canonical. Like, did you used to? I'm like, no, never, ever, ever, ever. So, but that's, I think, really, reflects how amazing the Canonical and Ubuntu are, as far as, there's an equal playing stage where if you do, and all I've done is run booths and been active on Reddit and so on, where it's like people are like, oh, you're really, you've done a lot of great things. Are you really not like paid to do it? Like, no, I do this in my time off because.
So I think that may actually not to derail the conversation already, but that may be an important distinction to lay down. I talk often about Red Hat, Fedora, CentOS, Rocky Linux, Alma Linux, how that relationship exists in the enterprise Linux space. But what is the relationship then between Debian, Ubuntu, and then, of course, Canonical?
So the very first time I was so we were scale, 23x, so scale 6x. They said, hey, you're nearby, Ubuntu, California. Do you want to run a booth? And I said, yeah, great. So three of us went and went to Party City and got plastic tablecloths, red, orange, and yellow, and we were like, we're gonna try to do our best. And we were like, really, it's hard to think back. It was like 20 something years ago, and a little scary, and of course everyone was super friendly. But we got to the booth, we were setting it up, and then we were in the booth over here, and over here was the Debian booth across the way. This was long ago. This was Ubuntu, 2504 or something. And so we got set up, and I went over and said, "Hey, sorry, because Ubuntu." So what happened at the time was Ubuntu had launched, and I at the same time I was like, "Oh, it's a vanity distro based off of Community, yeah, whatever. It'll be around." I remember the Lindows thing, right? I'm like, "Yeah, whatever. It'll be around for 2 years. It's not sustainable, whatever." That I was really cynical about it, but it really worked, and I'd used Linux before. I used Slackware, I used Debian, Red Hat, other things before, and OpenSUSE had just started. It was SUSE, not OpenSUSE at the time, and it worked great. And I realized, oh, you have to upgrade, keep your home directory in a different partition and upgrade. I'm like, well, if I want to do that 3 times a year, I would just stick with Windows, right, to reinstall. What? I don't understand. So, and then Ubuntu came out. It was really cool. So when it came out, it blew up in popularity. And I'm like, after half a year, I'm like, all right, second release, people are still crazy about it. It's free. Why would you be crazy about it if this is some Slashdot way back when? Why would you even care back then unless there's something to it? So I tried it. I'm like, okay. So I kind of like KDE a little bit, like GNOME's a little simple, but it just works. And I'm like, at which point I had, when I was 14, this was 10 years later. When I was 14 in 1994, using Ubuntu meant taking my 80 megabyte hard drive, either moving everything to floppy disk and reformatting, or just shrinking it and reformatting, which was a disaster at the time. Maybe it might lose all your data. Actually, very reliable when I used it, but moving over and installing things and then playing it for a couple hours, and it was 11 o'clock at night, and then it was 14. So, all right, go back, reformat the drive, reinstall DOS and Windows, move all your stuff back over, in the end. So and I was like, but that, it was interesting enough where I would do that. And there was X, and it had VGA cards. That was some weird thing about virtual desktops where you could, at the time, I had 640 by 480. It was 800 by 600. So I'd move my mouse and it would shift over. It was still kind of something interesting, right? So, and I'd use it, I mean, obviously through college, this and that, here or there, but when Ubuntu came out, it just worked. And so now, meanwhile, in DOS, I was like, all right, so some games I need to create a boot floppy where I have certain drivers and stuff, but it was, so it was really technical. And then for the Ubuntu, and I'd worked with Slackware and other things where all right, so there's an XKCD comic where it's called X11, where it's how happy I am with my life in general is the y-axis. X is since I've had to open xorg.conf, and I'm like, it wasn't that, it was x386.conf config, and you had to put the right vsync values or you let the magic smoke out of your monitors. So that was the thing. And Ubuntu made it really easy and simple. And I loved the idea of free software. I'd done some programming, a couple shareware stuff, a little here and there, but that didn't get much traffic. But on BBS, it was there, it was available. But the idea of just doing things because it helped other people and sharing was something interesting to me. And
so I'm trying to think through kind of the process of how Ubuntu is deployed on a regular basis. And so it's based on Debian, but Debian tends to be a little bit slower, a little bit more methodical in its releases. And Ubuntu's one of the more leading versions of Linux distributions out there. So the kernel is usually a little bit closer to the GitHub version, to the kernel.org, the official upstream kernel. So have you? How is that relationship between Debian and Ubuntu? What does that look like beyond just the sort of the technical?
So when Ubuntu began, it was called No Name Yet Project, and basically Mark Shuttleworth went and hired a ton of the foremost Ubuntu developers, and so Debian developers, and so there was a lot of early on like, well, Ubuntu is just trying to steal from Debian, but at the time and today, the way you fix a bug in Debian in Ubuntu is to so the way Ubuntu works is there's a release every 6 months, and so so 3 months after the development begins, they lock everything down, and then they're auto sync for 3 months, and then they lock it down, and then you have to like request it. But basically, the way that you fix things in Ubuntu, canonically, so to speak, is you find a bug, you fix it in Debian if they want the fix. You fix it in Debian and resync it back to Ubuntu. So Ubuntu's always been like, let's make Debian the best ever, because, and early on at scale, I would say this was, back in 2009, right? People would ask the same thing. I said, well, every Ubuntu fan is a fan of Debian, even if they don't know it. I prefer if they do know it, but that's fine. But it's the same thing, right? So if there's a bug, if there's a foundational bug in Ubuntu, you fix it in Debian first and sync it back during development.
So you mentioned that you are heavily involved in the Ubuntu community, both locally and kind of overall. But you mentioned that you use Ubuntu a lot in your daily life. What does that look like for you? Is it just personal, or is it at work?
Both. So for myself, so not only do I just have Ubuntu like on my computer. In fact, I did a so I went 10 years installing LTS to LTS, and then I a few years back did it a little too early and killed my hard drive. The one time I'm like, I won't do a disk image. It's fine, and ruined everything, and my backups solved everything. So do your backups; it's very important. And I was very annoyed, but it was fine. But the good news was that I use Ubuntu, on my computer and on my laptop, and laptop tends to get the development version a little faster than my desktop version. My desktop version now that I'm like old, it just needs to work. And I love all the techie stuff, but I like things to just not have problems and just work. So what it looks like is I my all my computers run Ubuntu. My desktop can boot into Windows 11, which happens about every 4 months if I want to game or something, and then I spent 3 hours updating. I'm like, well, that's my time to play games. I guess I reboot and I'll just try again in a week. But even some of my clients, like who run servers, I do IT work as well. They're like, they go to Ubuntu and like everything just works and they're happy and fine. And what I would like to do, I do IT work, but primarily I am a fiction writer. I do translations, and so even with my I translated 3 novels from German to English, and running Ubuntu, I installed a little app, and I used my MetaQuest 2 and eventually 3 headset, put it on every day, put in headphones, listen to music, and project my screens, and I just use it all day. I've published, I work for people. I do manuscript formatting and editing things for other people who are writers, and it's all in Ubuntu. It's like LibreOffice, Sigil, the Quest 3 headsets. Just I use it immersed. It doesn't matter. I just project my screens, and I just get to work. When I'm writing, I use Focuswriter to write stories, and then I use LibreOffice for like spell check and grammar, before I format it. But everything just works, and it's really kind of cool because so we need people to. So with communities, in a good place, but I think that what we always need are more people who come in and say, hey, this is new, or this is different, this is a different perspective, or I use Ubuntu for this. I think that the more perspectives and views that we see, the better. And I think that the Ubuntu community is really good at welcoming people who are new. I know that certainly in the last, so Ubuntu 2604 at the time of this recording comes out in 2 days. And the Ubuntu subreddit on Reddit has been inundated with people like, so I installed 2604. I'm like, you did not, because it's Resolute Raccoon until Thursday at some point. Someone presses a button, and then it's 2604 because that's the official release. But like, people have been like, for the last couple of weeks, like, I did this and that, and like, I had this old computer, or it was running Windows, or it wasn't running Windows, or it was just old, or it was just slow, whatever. I installed it. Now it says a new lease on life. I'm really excited. And so the trick, I think, is to really welcome people who are really excited. There's a lot. So at the moment, a lot of people last year are like, Windows 10 to Windows 11 changed the hardware requirements in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense to people. And so I think that a lot of people are like, and that's not the best reason to jump to Ubuntu. The best reason is because Ubuntu is amazing. But if you find yourself in that situation, people are like, what do I do? And they're like, I found Ubuntu, I'm going to try it. But the communities have been really, really good about like jumping in, like, congratulations and welcome, and we're happy you're here, and we hope you are productive, because once again, computers in the very end are just tools. They do the thing you want them to do. So you get work done. Nobody sits at a computer like, oh, now in the old days, in the 80s and 90s, you'd turn on your computer, especially IBM PC, not Amiga's. Commodores had more, Amiga's had like more multitasking, but like, you turn on the computer and you sit down, get a command line, it boot up, and you're like, all right, what do I want this computer to do for the next hour or two? And you pick one thing and you run one program, and then you get your work done and stop. Okay, now what do I want to do? Maybe a game, take a break, or whatever. Windows, even early Windows, you could like solitaire in the background. So every hour you'd like flip over and fool around for 5 minutes, and then you'd flip back. But you couldn't run 20 programs. Nowadays, and online, you would be like, it would be like, this is my computer here, and you could like, I'm going to stop everything, open a terminal program, dial on my phone line, so no one else could call, or if they did call waiting, it would end your connection, you interrupt your download. You would deliberately you do one thing at a time. Nowadays it's like you can run 20 programs at once and no big deal. Switch back and forth as you want. But
well, that's awesome. And I really appreciate you jumping on and talking about Ubuntu, about your journey, and about the community a little bit. If there's anywhere you want to send folks, where should listeners go to learn more?
Good question. So for Ubuntu itself, generically, the Reddit subreddit is pretty, one of the nicest subreddits ever. The Discworld subreddit, I think, is the nicest ever, because if you read those books, you have to be a nice person. Otherwise you bounce off. But yeah, reddit.com/r/Ubuntu is a good generic place. But I think really where I would send people, other than ubuntu.com, is discourse.ubuntu.com is the official forums, and even the old Ubuntu forums. If everyone's like, it's been a couple of years, I remember the Ubuntu forums. They've all merged, and as on the community council, I kind of there is a communications council that they kind of oversaw the whole thing, but they pushed towards the community council to make sure that everything was like smooth and solid and copacetic. And I remember saying, it's all private, right? But like, I remember saying they had like a proposal to move from the forums to the discourse and merge. And I'm like, this is the best, most well thought out transition plan I've ever seen in my life. I've been a community manager since 1997. And I'm like, they got it all solved and everyone agrees and everyone's happy because they all know what they're doing and they're all experts, and let's do it. And there's twice a month there's like meetings, and I jump in every so often. They would joke sometimes, oh, community council is here to like oversee. I'm like, I just want to keep an eye on what you're doing. I trust you. And now they don't do that anymore. They're like, oh, hey, happy to see you. But they were happy to see me before. But it's just like, that's a great place to be, and everyone's really happy and really excited. If you are looking for a local community, I would say ubuntu.com/community. And that's a great place for those jumping off points for local community teams that might be in person as well. And because, online is really the big thing that we push for, because we're on this post-COVID world. There are still local community teams that are amazing, and that's a great way to either find one near you or get started if there aren't one near you and you want to get started as well. So ubuntu.com/community, and that's a jumping off point for everything else as well.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining me, Nathan. This was a great conversation. Really appreciated getting your experience and hearing your stories. It was really helpful. So we're going to wrap up this episode here, and I'm really excited because here in 2 weeks, we're having my first ever repeat guest, Mr. Carl Abbott, who worked with me at Red Hat, is joining me. We're going to be talking about AI and how it is or isn't actually impacting our work. Of course, the IT Guy Show comes to you every 2 weeks, either on YouTube or on audio versions. So make sure to subscribe, and please hit the like button. It only takes like 3 seconds. You could have hit it already. So hit the like button and make sure you subscribe, because we've got new content coming out every 2 weeks. So on behalf of my guests today, Nathan from the Ubuntu community, and myself, Eric the IT Guy Hendricks, really appreciate you all joining us, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.